Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to the 49th Annual Conference of the Canada-United States Law Institute. So it's amazing, right? We've been here 49 years, started in 1976 by Professor Sidney Picker, and this is our 49th year. We have a fabulous conference, and we have a fabulous evening for you tonight. So I'll give you a little bit of the back. I'm Steve Petrus. I'm the U.S. National Director of the Canada-United States Law Institute. And first of all, I want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, because without our sponsors, we can't put on these conferences. And our gold sponsor is the Consulate General of Canada in Detroit. Silver sponsor is Richard W. Pogue, a good friend, GRL Engineers, Pile Dynamics. Our bronze sponsors are the Quebec office in Chicago, Baker Hostetler, Barrett America, Formica Corporation, Taft Stettinius, and Yormic Law. And also thank you to our community sponsors, which are Aero Montreal, the British American Chamber of Commerce, the Cleveland Council on World Affairs, the Council of the Great Lakes Region, Global Aero Industries, the Greater Cleveland International Lawyers Group, the Northern Ohio District Export Council, and the Ohio Aerospace Institute. And finally, I want to also thank our executive committee, and if the members of our executive committee who are here, if they could stand up when I call your name, that would be appreciated. Co-presidents of the executive committee are Andrew Botterell, Dean of the Law Faculty at the University of Western Ontario, Paul Rose. Paul, where are you? Dean of Case Western Reserve Law School, Peter MacKay, our Canadian co-chair, right here. Jim Blanchard, our U.S. co-chair. Jim. Kai Carmody is our Canadian National Director. He could not be with us today. Myself as the U.S. National Director. We have two co-managing. I'm sure you're going to get sick of hearing my voice, okay? We have two co-managing directors, Ted Perrin and Steve Paley. Ted and Steve, where are you guys? Ted. Okay. And we have a program coordinator, Eric Seiler. Eric is over there, back there. And now I'll name the open members of our executive committee. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Heather Lorenzon, our development director. Heather, where are you? There she is, okay. All right. So Martha Hall Finley, Diane Francis, James Graham, Lawrence Herman, Selma Lusenberg, Richard Newcomb, Dick, where are you? And Diane's over there too with you. Raul Osado, Raul, Christopher Sands, and Michael Scharf. So anyway, to open up our conference today and to welcome us here, I want to introduce to you Jim Blanchard. Jim has been a longtime member of our executive committee. He's the co-chair. He's the U.S. National co-chair. And he's an extremely distinguished career. He was a representative in the U.S. Congress from Michigan. He was the governor of Michigan, and he was the U.S. ambassador to Canada. So Jim, take it away.
Steve, thank you, Steve, and thank you for the good, wonderful job you do. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I have a 45-minute address on the future of Canada-U.S. relations, but I'm going to save that for some other night, some other day. But we do appreciate the staff, the work here, and all of you being here. This is, of course, as you know, the most challenging time of U.S.-Canada relations, frankly, in modern history. We're going to be dealing with that tonight, tomorrow. There are a lot of answers, a lot of analyses, but I have good news, and that is that recently the United States Senate passed a resolution supporting Canada and calling for the end of tariffs by the White House. Trust me, that is a very positive development. The next thing I should tell you is yesterday, from Michigan, a man named Peter Hoekstra, former member of Congress, former ambassador to the Netherlands, was confirmed as U.S. ambassador to Canada. That was the very first ambassador confirmed. He was also the first nominee to have his hearing. So we are now going to have an ambassador from Michigan who knows a lot about things like energy, autos, agriculture, cultural exchanges, family, everything. So that's really good too. And the other thing I want to mention is in the fall, we're going to, let me have that. I'm busy giving a speech right now. Thank you very much. I used to pretend that it was President Clinton, but I don't do that anymore. It's the CIA, actually. They want to know what I'm saying about our president. I'm not even going to mention his name. Sorry, folks. I'm supposed to tell you to turn off your cell phones, by the way. Anyway, this fall we're gonna cut the ribbon. We're gonna open the Gordie Howe International Bridge. This is going to be. This is the most important infrastructure project in North America, and it's going to secure for all time not just 6 lanes of trade and movement of goods and services and trucks and cars, but it's going to have 12 feet of pedestrian walks, bicycle paths. It's going to really secure the bond between Windsor and Detroit, Michigan and Ontario, and the United States and Canada. And that's going to be worth celebrating. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm trying to find ways, and I do, of positive things. And those 3 things I mentioned are actually very positive things. In your hands will be the future of our relations. But I will tell you, I have a co-chair who knows as much about government as anybody that I've met in Canada, or actually in the United States. He's my co-chair. I'm going to introduce him in a moment. In Canada, he was the Minister of Justice and Attorney General. He was Minister of Defense. He was Minister of Foreign Affairs. Couldn't keep it up. Yeah, good. He was in Parliament for probably about 18 years. I'm trying to remember. He's from Nova Scotia. He's practices law now. Is it McGinnis Cooper? Is that who you're with? Yeah, that's a great law firm. And he's just an all-around expert on how things work. A dedicated civil servant. My friend and yours, we're pleased to have him as our co-chair, Peter MacKay. Oh, by the way, founder of the modern Conservative Party in Canada. Good luck, boys.
Well, thank you very much, Jim, for the kind words, and welcome, everyone. I just want to pick up on the reference to the new Gordie Howe Bridge, and the Canadians in the room will understand this, that I was told that was not an appropriate name for that bridge when it was first announced, even though it was our government. And the reason being, and I'm a lifelong Detroit Red Wings fan, Jim, is that nobody ever crossed Gordie Howe. Jim, it's an honor to follow you, and appropriate given the task that I've been assigned. And Stephen asked me some time ago to say a word about our departed colleague and the former co-chair with Jim, and that is Jim Peterson. And when I think of the epitome of a parliamentarian in our parliament, Jim filled that role. He was a gentleman. He was a good man. And I say that because he was understated. He was humble. He was somebody who, in many ways, broke the mold for politics in Canada. He was, again, nonpartisan in a way that brought about positive results for our country. He was expert in trade. He was an extremely accomplished academic, having studied in Canada, in the United States, at The Hague, and he studied at the Sorbonne. He was a musician. He was a great friend to people, regardless of their place of origin, religion, ethnicity, or politics. He rose above that. He came from very humble beginnings in Canada. His parents were from rural Saskatchewan. They relocated to London, Ontario, who have close connections, of course, at the University of Western, to Case University. And Jim, very early in life, started to make a mark wherever he went because of his quiet, effective way with people. He always had a wry smile and a laugh and a disarming personality, but sterling character. He was a man, as I said, who had accomplished a great deal early in life, including getting elected to our parliament, serving 3 prime ministers in different portfolios, but he really was a citizen of the world. He always looked outward and brought his experiences back. He married his, not childhood sweetheart, his junior high sweetheart, and was married for 60 years to Heather. He came from a long line of politics. His father, and he had a brother who was the Premier of Ontario, our largest province, and another brother who served in the legislature. And within his circle of friends, he counted kings and queens, accomplished people everywhere, but his happiest place was on his farm, where he could sit on his porch and listen to music and be amongst the elements. Jim was a remarkable man who is missed by all. I had the good fortune, as you did, Jim, to be with family and friends who gathered in Toronto this fall to celebrate his life. And that's an expression that gets used a lot, celebration of life. But this truly fit that descriptor. It was a celebration of a truly wonderful human being and a great Canadian. And I was struck, Jim, as those in attendance, by the passionate and loving memories that were shared by those who took to the mic. And his family, while obviously greatly saddened by his loss, recognized through regaling those present with tales of Jim's life. And there was much laughter and a few tears. But I would ask that you would join me in proposing a toast to Jim for his life and memories. He was, as Oliver Wendell Holmes said, a person who took part in the great issues and causes of his time, on pain of being judged as never to have truly lived. Well, Jim lived many lives, and we were lucky to have shared him with Cusley here in the United States and in Canada and around the world. So, if you'll join me.
Here, here.
In the memory of Jim Peterson. Here, here. To Jim. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, that was wonderful. Yeah, thank you very much, Peter. That was a great tribute to our former Canadian co-chair, Jim Peterson. So we're going to take a break, allow you some time to eat your dinner, and then we will be back probably in about 10, 15 minutes to start our program. So enjoy your dinner. We're going to start our program tonight, and the first item on our agenda is every year we give out 2 awards. And the 2 awards are named after 2 people who were intrinsically bonded to the Canada-United States Law Institute. The first award is the Sidney Picker Award. Sidney Picker, as I mentioned before, started this organization in 1976. And so this year, we're very happy to present the Sidney Picker Award to Raul Rosado, Jr. And let me explain a little bit. Sidney Picker was an extremely well-respected professor of international law here at Case Western Reserve University School of Law. And he's the one who came up with the idea for this institute. And now we're in our 49th year. For many years, we have recognized lawyers who have contributed greatly to Canada-United States relations and our institute by giving them the Sidney Picker Award. And Raul is one such lawyer. He's no stranger to our institute. He's been on our executive committee for over 8 years. Raul is the Vice President and General Counsel, International Business of Formica Group, which is a global leading brands for surface materials and solutions. It's headquartered in the Netherlands, and it has operations in the United States and Canada. Prior to joining Formica Group, Raul was the General Counsel, Corporate Strategy and Compliance Officer at Cognis Corporation, a German global manufacturer of specialty chemicals. Raul paused his legal career, and this is very interesting, to manage LensCrafters' multinational charitable mission program, providing free eye care and recycled glasses to the needy in Africa, Asia, Central and South America, in conjunction with Lions Club International. So he's got a charitable bent as well. His experience includes working at a private law firm in Cincinnati, and he began his career as an assistant Ohio Attorney General. He was born and raised in Puerto Rico, and one of his favorite assignments has been serving as the team liaison for Puerto Rico basketball at the Olympic Games, the World Championship basketball, the Pan American Games, and the Goodwill Games. He attended Xavier University, where he graduated with honors and obtained his law degree from the University of Cincinnati. So, Raul, the Sidney Picker Award. Now, as it happens, we normally present plaques, but the plaque manufacturer, who I think is in Minnesota, has actually had trouble getting plaques made this year. So I'm going to have to send you your plaque. Okay?
Thank you.
All right.
April Fools.
So anyway, congratulations, Raul.
Steve.
Thank you for your good work. Yeah. Now, Raul, was it a surprise?
That was a very good surprise. I was wondering what I got to sit on the big kid's table.
Yeah. The next award is the Henry T. King Award, Henry T. King Jr. Award. Henry T. King, after Sidney Picker retired, Henry T. King became the U.S. National Director for the Canada-U.S. Law Institute. Henry was a very distinguished lawyer. He was the youngest prosecutor at the Nuremberg war crimes trials after World War II. And he loved this organization. In fact, this bell that you hear, you'll probably get sick of hearing it, is Henry's bell. This is what he used to call us to order over these years at these conferences. And the Henry T. King Award is meant to recognize someone who has provided great service to our institute and honors Henry King, who is known to many of us here. So this year's award goes to Stephen DeBoer. Stephen. Now, Stephen also is our keynote speaker tonight. So while I present his reward, I'm also going to introduce him for his remarks. Stephen, just a week ago or so, retired from his appointed position as Deputy Minister of Foreign and Defense Policy Advisor to the Prime Minister of Canada. He held that position since June of 2023. Previously, Stephen was Assistant Deputy Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada's International Affairs Branch, and prior to that, Ambassador and Permanent Representative to the World Trade Organization in Geneva, Switzerland. While in that position, or maybe shortly after that position, He spoke at one of our annual conferences, just like he's going to speak today, and he's going to participate in a panel tomorrow. And I think that was one of two prior times that you came to our conference, our annual conference. Stephen's distinguished career in Canada's government includes many important positions. He was a member of Global Affairs Canada, where he held various positions in the department, including in the Investment Trade Policy and North American Trade Policy divisions, Director of the Softwood Lumber Division, Director of Oceans and Environmental Law Division. He left Global Affairs Canada for a stint at Environment Canada, where he served as the Deputy Chief Negotiator for Climate Change and the Director General responsible for Canada's international climate change negotiations and partnerships. He returned to Global Affairs Canada as the Director General of the Trade and Controls Bureau. He went on to serve, by the way, as Canada's ambassador to Poland and ambassador to Belarus. Mr. de Boer has a Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Law degree from our sister school, the University of Western Ontario. And he has a Master's of Law in International and Comparative Law from Georgetown University. So congratulations, Stephen, on being the recipient of the Henry T. King Jr. Award. And after... No, same thing. The plaque...
Am I speaking now? Or
Yes, yeah.
okay.
So, yeah, please stay up here. So, you've already heard who he is. He obviously has deep experience in international trade and international policy. He's got the inside story on what's going on in Canada when it comes to trade. So here to deliver our keynote speech tonight, Stephen de Beer. Stephen.
I can honestly say I had no idea, and I'm deeply touched and flattered. I knew Henry King. I knew him quite well. I was here at Case Western Reserve as an exchange student when I was at Western Law, so I got to know him very well. I also got to know Sid Picker very well, and there used to be these monthly meetings of the international, I guess it was a bar association meeting. There were lunches and students got to go for free. And Sydney would take us in he had a very beautiful old Mercedes-Benz, and we would drive from University Circle to downtown Cleveland for these lunches. Henry King was an incredible personality, really made these conferences work. Absolutely committed to international law and absolutely committed to the Canada-US relationship. So it's truly a deep honor to get this award and a surprise. But apparently I need to sing for my supper, so now I understand why. So I am very pleased to be here. Thank you so much for the award, and thank you so much for the opportunity to address this august group. It's great to be back in Cleveland. I've been to actually quite a few conferences, and back in the day when I was here in 1989, Henry had this idea of having conferences in some kind of felt godforsaken place east of here, and he would put us in a hotel. There was nothing nearby, and the idea was it was a whole weekend of Coosly conference. I can imagine that for some people it felt kind of imprisoning. For a student, it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. So I started in 1989 coming to Coosly conferences, and I've been coming back on and off since, and I have to admit that once I got posted in 2015, my participation fell off, but I'm back. So, and it's great to be back here in Cleveland. It's great to be back here at the law school. So just a bit about me and the observations that I intend to share with you this evening. As you just heard, I retired last week as the Foreign and Defense Policy Advisor to the Prime Minister of Canada. So the good news on that is I'm unhinged. Normally, a civil servant like me would not be able to speak during an election campaign because of the caretaker convention, but I don't have those. I don't have that sort of controlling me, as it were. But I would also say that this also means, because of my previous role, that I will not be sharing any information that I would have gleaned as the Foreign and Defense Policy Advisor to the Prime Minister. The views that I'm sharing this evening are very much my own and not the views of the Government of Canada. I should also say, in my role as Foreign and Defense Policy Advisor to the Prime Minister, I supported the Prime Minister on all foreign policy and defense policy questions. I also accompanied him on, and in both cases it was a him, on all of the international travel and all the international interactions that the Prime Minister had. So I had a great front row seat to a lot of things that were going on. The day after President Trump was elected, Prime Minister Trudeau reconstituted a cabinet committee on Canada-US relations, and I was the secretary to that cabinet committee, so that was another fascinating front row seat as to the political discussions that were happening with respect to the relationship. And as you can imagine, that was a very busy, and still is a very busy committee. And in fact, you will have, if any of you who follows the Canadian election and the Canadian processes right now, when Prime Minister Carney has come back to Ottawa, and they talk about him assuming the Prime Minister role, it is to come back for the Canada-US Cabinet Committee meeting. So that's where those decisions are made. Oh, just about knocked over Henry King's bell. So my first observation is that I think the conference organizers got it right when they set out in the conference title the term North America crisis, and further hypothesized that it will lead to the dismantling of the world trading order. On the second proposition, I think there'll be a lot of talk tomorrow about that. I will foreshadow my remarks for tomorrow by saying that at a minimum, the world trading order will be profoundly altered, if not dismantled. But let's leave most of that discussion until tomorrow. I'd like to focus more on the use of the phrase North America crisis. And of course, it is a crisis. With respect to the economy, Canadians and Americans are facing layoffs and job losses. Most economists predict we are facing a recession. As I said, I think calling this a crisis is the right formulation. But I'm not sure that the United States is necessarily aware. The exception being most of you in this room and those who spend a lot of time thinking about the Canada-US relationship. About the other aspects that make what is happening a crisis, I think a lot of, particularly Americans, are not up to speed. To understand this, it is useful to reflect on Canada and why and how it exists. I think a good way to understand how Canadians view themselves is to recount an interaction I had with the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce with whom I used to work. He shared with me comments he was going to make at a conference in Toronto where he proposed to open up his remarks by saying that he admired Canadians because they were just like us. That is, indistinguishable from Americans. I told him that would not go over very well with the Canadian audience. What he failed to realize is that what he thought was the ultimate compliment to give to a Canadian, Canadians perceive as an insult. Of course, I was also concerned that a senior U.S. government official was not attuned to how Canadians view themselves in the world. and that attitude persists. When President Trump suggests that Canada should become the 51st state, he assumes Canadians have an unrequited desire to be part of the United States. What he may perceive as a positive outcome, Canadians almost universally find insulting at a minimum. Most view this for what it is, an existential threat. It's not funny. It's not a joke. Is that a crisis? Absolutely. I suspect that the organizers of this conference thought that the imposition of tariffs was the crisis. And it is, but it's much bigger than tariffs. I would imagine most would understand that subsuming one state by another would be seen as a crisis. But I would offer that there's more going on here with respect to Canada. I think a recounting of history is in order. When we reflect on Canada's history and its development, it really is negative in the sense of what we did not want or want to become. By that I mean Canada's reason for being, its raison d'etre, was not to be the United States or to be a part of the United States. This is a sentiment that goes back at least as far back as the U.S. War of Independence, when inhabitants of the 13 colonies loyal to King George III left and headed north to the British colonies, which would become Canada. Okay, I have to put this bell down. Since then, Canada's existence has been challenged a number of times, and Canadians have never wavered. During the War of 1812, the British successfully defended the colony of Canada from U.S. attack, although not before the British burned the White House and the Americans sacked what is now called Toronto. The fear of subsequent attack led to the building of the Rideau Canal, and one of the reasons why Ottawa was chosen to be the capital of first the province of Canada and then the Dominion of Canada. In fact, the fear that the large and successful northern armies, after defeating the South in the Civil War, would turn their armies north and take over what was then the province of Canada, led to the creation of knitting 3 British colonies into the Dominion of Canada in 1867. Subsequently, the building of the Canada Pacific Railroad to the Pacific Coast was Canada's assertion of sovereignty across the northern portion of the continent, with the explicit intention of keeping the United States out. Then in 1891, a tired Canadian Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, faced the prospect of fighting and in all probability losing his 4th mandate. It was not clear that he could win a 4th mandate. Enter Ohio Senator McKinley, as he then was, who proposed steep tariffs to build the U.S. manufacturing sector. McKinley, along with Secretary of State James Blaine, saw annexation of Canada as one of their goals. The Canadian response was to maintain similar tariffs, and Macdonald campaigned on this national tariff policy and went on to win his 4th term in office. Does any of this sound familiar? And what has happened since then? Since World War II, and in fact during the war, the US and Canada worked hard to develop an ever-deepening relationship. In the past 80 years, both countries have been increasingly integrated. It is a long and complex relationship. One of the things I did in my past job was to ask the legal team to do an evaluation of Canada's legal commitments vis-à-vis the United States. The lawyers demurred, telling me that there were over 750 legal commitments, treaties, binding MOUs, etc., between the 2 nations. This is truly a complex relationship, and I would offer it has functioned very well. So well, in fact, both Americans and Canadians have taken it largely for granted. One of the examples I like to give is to sort of illustrate the complexity of the relationship and its good functioning is to consider a very simple example. Why is it that we can drive freely within our two countries, regardless of the origin of the license plate, or what I think you refer to here as tags, that are on our vehicle? How does that work? Well, all 10 provinces and the 3 territories entered into bilateral relationships with all 50 states to recognize each other's license plates. It's both complex and functional and flies below the radar of almost all of us. Our relationship became even deeper with the signing first of the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement and then NAFTA, evidence of our deepening economic interdependence, albeit unbalanced in that Canada's trade dependence is far greater on the US than the reverse. CUSMA, or USMCA, in my view, was already the beginning of a movement away from the underlying principle of NAFTA, which had at its core, I would argue, ultimately the creation of one North American economic space. CUSMA is perhaps more traditional in maintaining a free trade space or spaces within North America. It was not supposed to be this way. I think most free traders would argue that the next logical step for Canada and the US would be for deeper integration, perhaps leading to a customs union and greater labor mobility. What we have seen since the election of President Trump is essentially a repudiation of the Free Trade Agreement, the imposition of tariffs being the most blatant violation of that agreement. What else have we learned since January 20th? There are a couple of teachable moments that Canada has observed that I think will also animate our discussion tomorrow. Deals with the US are not long-lasting or particularly valuable. The imposition of tariffs, or other measures for that matter, will be malleable, unpredictable, and not necessarily supported by evidence or economic principles. In that sense, the US is not a reliable or a trusted partner. So what do we have instead? A trade war between the two countries, a consumer boycott in Canada of US products, a weakening of ties that bind us together. Much has been said in Canada, particularly now during an election, that Canada needs to reduce its trade dependency on the US as some sort of solution. To that I would offer that Canada actually has reduced its trade dependency on the US in the last 20 years, but it's still huge and cannot be changed quickly. I stress it will not do so because when it comes to trade, I would argue geography is destiny. We are physically attached to the United States with no other trade partners close by. So that takes me back to having to manage the relationship, but on new terms that will probably not be as favorable as what Canada enjoyed in the past. I would offer that perhaps the next deal that is negotiated with the US is not so much a new CUSMA, for example, but rather a divorce agreement or a cohabitation agreement. This is a suboptimal outcome, but it's hard to see what else is possible, at least in the short term. I think you should all have drinks because this is really gloomy. I apologize. I would also suggest to you that here today in Cleveland never has the work of the Canada-US Law Institute been more important. This institute was founded almost 50 years ago to explore the legal and policy issues affecting the Canada-US relationship. Obviously, there is a lot to do. I would also offer that while CUSLI is not a wealthy organization, apparently they can't even afford plaques, the fact that it's housed in 2 universities perhaps gives it some immunity to do the work that needs to be done. In my view, and this is my view, I want to be clear, the Canada-US relationship is severely damaged by what has happened since January 20th. And I hope this is clear from my earlier comments. It's not just about tariffs. Comments about the 51st state is an existential threat that has resulted in a firm response in Canada, which can be summed up as either you can never or elbows up. Elbows up is a good hockey reference. I hope that there are lessons in the McKinley tariff example. In that case, the Republicans were defeated in the next election, and the Democrats started dismantling the high tariffs. The talk of annexation went away. The clear lesson was that tariffs do not work in the way intended, and there are also unintended consequences. For example, in that case, Canada developed stronger trade ties with Britain, a trade rival of the United States. This time around, we're seeing the removal of internal trade barriers within Canada at speeds never seen before. There's an open discussion about closer relations with the EU. There is a new focus on deepening existing trading relationships, increasing defense spending. We are witnessing, at the same time though, we are witnessing a weakening of our relationship within the US and a thickening of the Canada-US border. But what is also interesting about the McKinley tariff example is that Canada did get past the annexation threat, as evidenced by all of the work in the past 80 years to integrate our two economies. This time around, no one saw this attempt at annexation coming. I think almost all Canadians thought the notion was dead. And this makes working past the annexation threat more difficult. As we wrestle with imagining the way forward, I sadly cannot offer many solutions. Hopefully, the discussion tomorrow will be helpful to begin frame what needs to be done. I hope it's clear that I want this to happen. No one should be dancing about the demise or the weakening of this relationship. Clearly, Canada needs to manage its relationship with the United States. We are neighbors, economic and security partners. One big question is how we work past the annexation threat. How do we manage the Canada-US relationship now? What are its prospects in the short term? What are the long-term prospects? I leave you with these questions. I look forward to our discussion on all of these during the conference. Thank you.
We do have time for questions, if anybody has a question for our keynote speaker. Anyone? Everybody was enthralled and enthusiastic, right? Chris Sands.
Stephen, I know that Canada is supposed to host the next G7
Can't hear
summit.
you.
Oh, sorry. Hello. Stephen, I know that Canada is supposed to host the G7 summit that Canada asked us in June. How do you think Canada is prepared to host Donald Trump and the other world leaders, some of whom you've talked about as possible trade partners?
Well, I think there's a couple things that we need to remember or understand about President Trump. The one is, I think it will sort of depend what side of the bed he gets out of in the morning. And that's difficult to control for. But I would also say, I think that the G7 agenda that's being proposed by Canada is actually quite sensible in terms of it being appealing to the United States. I would also say that this year is the 50th anniversary of the G7, and there was a real thought within the Canadian government of going back to sort of basics. The G7 has become sort of a behemoth. Lots of countries participating, a very large agenda. And the thought was that maybe we should go back, maybe the most effective thing about the G7 is actually having a leaders-only discussion of the G7, not the G7 plus, 15 other countries, for example. So between keeping the conversation tight and keeping the agenda, setting the agenda in a way that is appealing to the United States, I think will help a lot. And I should also say, when we talk about taking the G7 back to basics, at its core, it was about economics. And so you can drive back to economics. I mean, the G7 discussion, it would be a great place to talk about China, quite frankly. I mean, it would be a good opportunity for the United States to talk with leading trading nations about how to deal with China. I can't predict whether that will be taken up, but I think it's highly likely that there will be full participation at the G7. This is my personal guess, but I think it's also useful to remember there are some really good golf courses around Kananaskis. I don't know why that's important, but apparently it makes a difference.
Steve,
Oh.
sorry.
How did Canada finesse the fact that he's a convicted grocer? They actually can't get into Canada on G7 in order to do it. I know this. It's.
I suspect. Could you repeat? Oh, so the question was, how does President Trump, actually get in the United States because he's a convicted criminal for the G7? My understanding is, and I suspect Peter MacKay knows this better than anyone in the room, but my understanding is that the Minister of Immigration can waive that quite easily, and I don't see why the Canadian government would not do that, obviously, to facilitate the visit.
That's right.
Whew.
My question, given your intimate role in advising the Prime Minister on defense, and I'll preface this by saying the issues around the border, of course, security, immigration, etc., fentanyl. But a bigger reality for Canada is we have a defense program, and it's more on the northern border. And I'm just wondering if, unlike the issue around the Canada-US border, where some progress, real progress, has been made in a short time, it's much more challenging for Canada to get to that elusive 2% of GDP spending, let's collapse our economy. I say that somewhat facetiously. But I wonder if you have thoughts on whether this is a real demand for the president, or is this just another leverage tool?
So I don't know. It's kind of intimidating to have the former Minister of Defense ask you a question about defense policy, but I got a Henry T. King Award behind me, so I'm good to go. I think what's really interesting about President Trump is that for almost everything that he says, there's a kernel of truth, or there's something that's animating what he's saying. Canada has not done a very good job of meeting its defense commitments. The US has been carrying the water for a lot of countries. And so there is something there. What's interesting is that there's been some chatter about 2%, 5%, pick a number. I don't know if it's ever come from President Trump himself. I think the bigger driver right now with respect to defense spending is the question of reliability of the United States. And so the notion of, you know what, like we have to pull up our socks. And there's a lot of pulling up to do. But I think that is a more animating principle. I know you were being facetious about collapsing the economy, reaching 2%, because we all know that we can do it. Like it's a matter of setting priorities. If you think about what Canada was doing during World War II, like we can do it. But what we need to have, and I think, and perhaps you felt this as well when you were the Minister of Defense, one of the reasons why we didn't get to 2% is that Canadians didn't care about 2%. Like, there wasn't a political drive to say, like we all said, oh, we love the Arctic, but no one, the Canadian electorate didn't say, and now defend the Arctic. They just thought it was kind of a cute notion. So, and I don't think that the average Canadian actually valued the Canadian Armed Forces in the way that anyone who knows them thinks that they should be valued. And I think what's happened since January 20th is that has changed. So it's not, and I don't want to suggest that that's necessarily negative, but people are saying, you know what, maybe there is something here. Maybe we should be doing more. Maybe this is something that's worth defending, and maybe we should be spending 2% or more than 2%, and maybe we should be resetting their priorities. So in a way, I think it's easier for any of the politicians, although really it's the two main leaders that would actually buy into this and say, thank you very much for giving me the mandate to move forward, because I don't think that mandate was there before. I really don't. Wow.
There's one. Jeff.
After the first Trump administration, did you have any hint what you would be encountering now?
So I think the conventional wisdom was that a Trump 2 administration would be a lot different than a Trump 1 administration. And I think that has proven true. And I think that's also, that speaks to the annexation discussion. That was never raised by Trump during what I call Trump 1 or during his first administration. Like, even if you compare, like, if any of you remember what it was like at the beginning of Trump 1, it was sort of chaotic and it took forever for him to appoint his cabinet. And this time around, he was ready. He was naming people. He was, I mean, Marco Rubio was like, his hearings were being held like almost right away. It was incredible how quickly he moved. And the people that he surrounded himself with is a very different set of, it's a very different group, and I would say it's actually a fairly unsettling group, quite frankly, compared to Trump 1. So we thought it would be, it's one thing to say, well, I think Trump 2 will be different than Trump 1, but you're not really quite sure how different or what those differences will be. Now we're starting to see what some of those differences are. There are some similarities as well, which is actually useful. Like Trump does seem to be responsive to markets, for example, hence the 90-day pause. He was responsive to markets in the first administration. He continues to be responsive. But yeah, it feels different. I think it is different.
Other questions? Anyone? No. Okay, well, thank you. Quick while you're ahead, yeah.
Quick while you're ahead.
I don't know. Thank you for the award. It was a big surprise.
Congratulations. All right. Well, as a result of that speech, we're going to postpone tomorrow's event for 90 days. Just kidding. We're going forward tomorrow. One thing that came up, and it's important to remember, you know, we are facing, I've never attended an annual conference of our institute with this kind of sentiment being expressed. You know, it's always been Canada, United States, best friends, move forward. I still think that all of us believe that. And, you know, we've got some work ahead of us to see how it's going to pan out. But the point of this conference, by the way, is to look at these issues honestly, openly, and respectfully, so that all the opinions can be heard and we can dissect what's going on and hopefully come up with some analysis and solutions that we feel comfortable with, and to preserve this very highly important, significant world relationship between these two great countries. So keep that in mind. You know, this is not gloom and doom. There is a future. We do have to move forward. We are going to be neighbors, right? And we're going to work together. And what we're going to do now, though, is we're going to enjoy dessert. There's dessert over here. I think you get to make your own sundaes. The bar's staying open. There's going to be music by our former Dean Scharf and his band called Raising the Bar. So please enjoy yourself. By the way, we start tomorrow morning at the Cleveland Botanical Garden across the street. 8 o'clock is breakfast, and the program will start at 8:45. So anyway, enjoy yourselves. Thanks for coming. We're adjourned for now, but please enjoy the evening. Thank you.